welcome to a live podcast. I don't think we've ever done it. No, we've done a live podcast before. That's a lie. We've done one. We did one for a little bit. It's different with the crowd. It's been a hot minute since I've had a crowd.
Fair. It's been a few
most
months.
of the time, it's just me and BC or myself and someone on Zoom. So, obviously, you all are here. You know what's happening. If you are watching on a streaming platform like YouTube, then you have no idea what's happening. We're here with Black Rabbit Mead in Reno, and we're doing this live. So I have William, and Jake, and everybody knows BC. We don't need to clap for him, but you can clap for William and Jake, of course.
Woo!
Oh, I think yes.
So I'm super excited to get to chat with these guys about the Meadery. We've kind of had a grand tour. It's been really fun to get to tour this, not only the space you guys got, but tour literally the Meads. It's been cool. So tell us a little bit about Black Rabbit.
So Black Rabbit Mead Company was founded just about 5 years ago now. We specialize in the production of what we describe as cider-style meads. So that's what the industry would describe more as a carbonated session mead. More or less, that means that our ABVs hover around 7%. They're carbonated. Just a touch of sweetness in there. We definitely lean towards the drier side. And then we use honey to make all the alcohol, right? So that's the only thing that's going into our primary ferment. But then we use a variety of things after that. Fruits, herbs, spices, different things to really explore a diversity of different flavor profiles that are not just delicious, but we also really try to focus on interesting as well.
You guys have a pretty big scene of mead cocktails, which I find really interesting. Talk about that a little bit, the combo that you've come up with, because I feel like that's super new that you guys are doing with spirits especially. You guys have a whole spirit line.
Yeah. You know, the mead world is so fascinating because as us mead aficionados love to acknowledge, you know, we're supposedly the world's most ancient alcohol, and therefore you would think that there would be a lot of ancient traditions that go along with it that inspire us mead makers to do what we do. And there certainly is a bit of that, but given that the industry almost globally, in a commercial sense at least, really waned over the last even couple centuries. I mean, it held on really strong in some parts of the world. We've lost a lot of those traditions, which is unfortunate in some senses, because when we see our brothers and sisters making good beers and good wines, going off these old recipes and these tried and true practices, we don't necessarily have that. But part of the upside of that is that mead makers are really exploring this, what's become this wilderness. And part of that exploration for us as mead makers has been just playing with all the different styles. Jake and I, we started making traditional meads years and years ago, and we describe a traditional mead as being higher in alcohol and generally more residual sugars, so sweeter, kind of drinks like a dessert wine, even though traditional meads can be made in a variety of ways. But then we discovered these cider-style meads, and we fell in love with them, and that's predominantly what we do. But then through that and some interesting history just in our own lives in the state, you know, having to do with regulatory issues in Nevada, but then COVID as well, we stumbled into using our meads to also make cocktails. And there's a lot of fun that can be had with those. And we've not only poured, but, you know, explored these things with, mixologists of our community, bartenders that play a lot with cocktails. And these carbonated session meads in particular have been found to be really fun substitutes for things like champagnes or sparkling wines or even sparkling water, to just give, not only to jack that ABV up even higher if it's relative to like a soda water or a tonic, but also give some really interesting qualities to the flavor profiles that you get out of these cocktails. And so that's kind of it in general. And then when it comes to the actual practice, we have so much fun. We do a lot of different things. Like Jake, what would you say some of your favorites are that we throw together?
Oh man. So the process of it is usually the best part. Like we go over to 1864, which is a local mixologist, a good friend, and bring over a ton of bottles, He brings out a ton of bottles, and then we kind of just start mixing and matching and coming up. So the summer of 1864, which is one of our most popular ones, I think you're drinking it right
That's
now.
what I'm having.
So that's a tasty one. That's a whiskey punch. Yeah, we have a bunch of bitters in there, some brown sugar, white sugar, and then we top it with our three-headed rabbit, which gives it kind of that drier, more approachable taste without all the sweetness that you usually get in a whiskey punch. That one was super fun to come up with. It was a long afternoon and an Uber ride home, but super fun to come up with nonetheless.
Well, what's cool is you guys have that, like, you're not, well, I mean, it is cool to live mix it, of course, but you guys are just pouring from a tap. So you guys have it just readily available, which is even more awesome in my opinion.
Yeah. So what we do is we come up with the base recipe for all the cocktails that we do, and then kind of extrapolate that number out, and we'll mix it all in a corny keg like you'd find at any home brewer. We'll come up with that recipe. Sometimes we'll carbonate that. Most of the time, though, we'll put that into a commercial keg and then top it with the traditional mead that we're using. And sometimes you have to mix them up before you pour each night. But yeah, they're usually just ready to go like instantly, and then top it with bitters, top it with a couple things, but usually they're just good to go on tap.
Yeah, and they really diversify what your menu can be like as a meadery. So a lot of meaderies, they stick to serving their own product, and in fact, there's, depending upon the state you're in, there may be regulations that require it. And that was the issue here in Nevada. We had an odd regulation all the way up until the late 2000 teens, and that was where, though breweries and distilleries could serve whatever they wanted, for instance, their own stuff, Jameson, tequila, didn't really matter, as long as they got the appropriate licenses for it. But wineries, which of course is what meaderies in the U.S. are technically qualified as, wineries are only allowed to sell their own product, which is something that we, are quite proud of. We would hope any winery would be proud of what they make, but it does limit the experience that you're able to provide your guests. And we really value providing just a really well-rounded, diverse, fun experience for our guests. And we acknowledge that not everyone is a mead drinker. And so we wanted to diversify our menu, and yet at that time we were only allowed to do it with what we made. But there was an interesting loophole of sorts for a winery in which you were allowed to fortify your wine with someone else's alcohol. And this is due to the long and rich tradition of ports across the world, right? So fortified wine. And though historically the tradition is to fortify a grape wine with a grape spirit, we took a looser interpretation of that, and we fortify our honey wine with other spirits, along with a bunch of
Could have been a grape. It could have, somewhere along the way, it could have been a grape.
It's always best to ask for forgiveness instead of permission.
That's BC's motto in life.
No doubt. Yeah, and it really helped us grow as a bar, because we had our wonderful cider style meads that people could come down for, but now we also had cocktails. And actually during COVID, it became really useful because Nevada kind of ebbed and flowed in how much we were able to be open to the general public, but we were pretty much always able to be open for bottle pickup. And though it takes us a long time to come up with a new recipe for mead, we could get a decent recipe, if not actually a delicious recipe, of a cocktail style mead pretty quickly. You just go hit up one of your friends that knows how to make a good cocktail at a bar and have them play around with your mead for an afternoon, and lo and behold, at the end of it, you got 2 or 3 cocktail style meads. And so it allowed us to almost every week, it felt like, probably not that rapidly, but pretty constantly come out with new cocktail style meads that we could throw in a bottle, put up on the social media world, and be like, get down the meadery, come on by and buy a couple bottles of this. And it allowed us, especially because we were really young at the time, we were only 6 months old as a meadery, it allowed us to stay relevant in the social media world, which was such a, for many people, it was the only world during COVID. And so we were able to stay present in people's minds and stay innovative and fresh, and of course, most importantly, delicious. And so the cocktail style meads became a wonderful part of our program here. And then ultimately Nevada law changed to where now we're able to serve whatever we want. And so we, I guess, more boldly come up with cocktail recipe development and sell them even more here. But they do really well in the meadery. We don't package them at this point and get them out for distribution. We're going to be starting that process with the TTB here on how to do that. But we think they'll work really well in a can or bottle too.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said just a little bit earlier. You were talking about the style of meads that you guys make, and you refer to them as cider style meads. And I don't know that that's a term that our audiences are going to be familiar with. So can you talk us through like what that means to you guys, how that translates in marketing and branding, and what that communicates to your customer about like the style of what they're consuming?
Yeah. So a long time ago, we broke down meads into kind of 3 to 4 categories, like cocktail style that Will just went over is kind of one we came up with on the fly. We had traditional style meads, which were like that higher ABV, a lot of residual sugar, or, depending, usually more residual sugar. And then we had beer style, which are braggots. I'm sure the audience has heard about that in the past, which as long as it has that 51% honey, then you can call it a braggot style mead. And then we came up with cider style, just because cider was a lot easier for most people in Nevada had never had mead. Like we were the first meadery in the state of Nevada. For some more archaic, weird laws that we've dealt with in Nevada, but we were the first meadery in Nevada. So a lot of people hadn't experienced mead in the past, and the way that we make it, we thought the easiest way or easiest correlation to make would be between ciders and the meads that we make, because it's about 7% alcohol, it's off dry, there's a little bit of sweetness to it, not overly sweet. Most of them come in, 001 to 004, depending on which style you're drinking. And then they're all carbonated. And so that cider style is just kind of a marketing thing that we felt like people could make the easiest jump between what they're used to drinking with hard apple ciders and what we're making here in the tap room.
We've seen that with a company who's switched their branding from Mead to Hard Honey. Specifically, they've rebranded to Hard Honey. I think in hopes to hit the hard seltzer crowd to say, well, this is hard seltzer honey, version. So I think it's kind of interesting to hear from this perspective and go, well, cider style, because I think a lot of people know, oh, cider, yeah, it's light and refreshing and mostly carbonated. I'm going to get something. So it's kind of if you had to pick a road, I'd rather go cider style and talk about it that way than say hard honey, because it feels like a road you're pushing really hard to get this different world. So I like that you guys are doing that. I think that's cool.
Yeah, the federal government is, plays a big role in the taxonomy of alcohols in general. And when we've talked with the TTB in the past about this, they expressed concern over referencing something as cider style that doesn't necessarily have apples in it. But we've found that the cider world has really diversified, and this is somewhat controversial, especially for cider lovers, to say that we don't find that a cider inherently needs to be made with apple, that you can have pineapple ciders and guava ciders and things of that sort. And what it's doing is just the evolution of language and culture, and that, yes, originally ciders were apple-based, if not entirely apple, but we've developed a variety of other carbonated session fruit wines since then, if not even before that, and whatever words we were using to describe those have fallen out of fashion, but cider has really held on, and I think for us can encompass anything that is just light, refreshing, lower ABV, sparkling, with some sort of fruit or agricultural product that's driving that fermentation. It certainly is a heck of a lot easier to say than carbonated session fruit wine. It's
Everybody knows what that is, obviously. Everyone's had one of those.
And so we're not at that point where we're describing what we do as a hard honey cider to everybody. We do use that phrase though, for instance, during sales visits to bars. I'll never forget one sales visit I did to a bar, and I was just talking all about our cider style meads and just how tasty they were and diverse they were. And he was just like, mead, huh? I just don't really know what that is. And I don't think our customers.
Viking
I was
drink,
like,
right?
But it's not like a traditional mead. It's like a cider. He's like, oh, wait a minute. You have ciders too? And I said, yes, we do also make ciders. Let me tell you about them. And then I just re-said everything I did, and the guy bought 3 kegs of them right then and there. So, the mead world is in such an interesting state right now, because even though earlier I said we've lost a lot of our tradition over the many centuries, there are still, these historic terms that we use of like a melomel or a metheglin or even the word mead, which still a lot of people don't know what that is. And we want to honor those traditions. We want to feel the pride of the uniqueness of our past, and even a bit of that sort of almost esoteric quality to it. And so it's interesting then to want to celebrate the deep history of mead and the communities that really have kept it alive over the many centuries, and at the same time evolve it to something that's more understandable and approachable to the general public. And I think the industry right now is in this interesting state of discovering itself. The fact that we call what Jake and I refer to as a traditional mead versus a cider style mead, what the industry has a many other terms for, but it all falls under the category mead, and yet it can drink very differently from itself. And whereas mead, yes, has grown in popularity a lot more, the taxonomy within mead, the industry has yet to really not only clarify that, because I understand in the judging world there is quite clear distinctions between these things, but we're still working on conveying that and all agreeing with each other on what to refer to these things as and how then to market ourselves as an industry. Because, and I'll just say this, and lastly on this little tidbit here of, when Black Rabbit describes itself as a mead, first and foremost, most people that come in here don't even know what that is. Secondly, when they do come here, they expect something that's a lot higher in alcohol and a lot sweeter. And so to do this carbonated session mead is an interesting marketing challenge as a company. And you can hold on to the roots and the passion of the industry and use their prescribed terms. And I see merit to that on some level, but it becomes even more tempting when dealing with the day-to-day person to meet them somewhere in the middle and use terminology that they're familiar with. And everyone knows what a cider is.
I think it's fascinating that mead is arguably the oldest alcoholic beverage in the world, but here we are in 2024 refining the terminology that we use to describe it because people still aren't familiar with it, right? And so you talked a little bit about the final gravities and that. I'd love it. We took a dime store tour of. Can you just tell us a little bit about your process, how a mead comes to life here at Black Rabbit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Will and I made what we call traditional meads for a long time. The higher ABV. We couldn't make one that we would like. Obviously, everyone tried them all the time, and we have a lot of gross faces ingrained in our minds of family and friends trying young meads over the years.
They grin and bear it.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah,
you guys are getting better. Thank you. But we couldn't make one that we were proud of and we felt comfortable serving to people we didn't know really well in less than 7 months. With the lower ABV of what we're doing, we're able to actually get it down to about 9 weeks at this point. So what we do is we start with about 2 barrels of honey, give or take, depending on the sugar content of the honey. And then we mix it with about 700 gallons of water, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No water.
It's just
traditional mead.
it's honey all the way down.
Honey on honey, and just super high ABV. Now, So
So,
it's about a 7-to-1 ratio.
what's a
on-
barrel of honey?
55 gallons.
55 gallons.
Yeah, so that's what we buy it on, is by the barrel. It gets, so it's about a
660 pounds.
7.
So it's like a 1 to 7 ratio.
Yep, 7-to-1 or water to honey. Mix it all up, make sure it's in that gravity range that we're looking for, and then we use a white wine yeast. We went through years.
Are you going to tell us the yeast?
Lalvin's D47?
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
You don't
we
know
played
how
with
many
it.
meaderies we talk to who won't tell us what yeast they use.
Oh,
Trade secrets.
yeah.
Yeah,
If someone-
I mean, the recipes did take us years to discover. We played around with Lalvin 7-1B for a long time, and we actually learned how to make a really good traditional mead from it. But yeah, it took on average 9 months to a year to get it to age where we really enjoyed it. And but it's also much higher in alcohol and it was much sweeter, and therefore you couldn't drink as much of it as well. And so then we discovered the cider style and then started playing around with Lalvin D47, and it's a really nice yeast. It's really forgiving when it comes to temperature variation back
So
in
I
our
was gonna ask
meadery.
about what temperature ambient do you guys ferment at?
Yeah, that's like
That's the burning question.
Trade secrets.
So we're in a building from 1915. So the back temperature of the meadery fluctuates quite a bit, but we'll ferment between 60 and 75. That's ideal.
Yeah, sometimes it creeps up into the low 80s, and we just get a bunch of fans and
Swamp cooler
Just
blowing
put it
right
under
on
the-
it.
yeah.
But yeah.
Or sometimes it can creep into those low 50s, which actually, of course, isn't as much of an issue. It just becomes a little slower for men at that time. The process takes longer, but the mead can come out even nicer at that point.
Yeah, usually, I mean, if we could, in an ideal world, we'd brew early fall through late spring. We wouldn't brew it all in summertime. It's not an ideal world, but one day.
So you
that's the goal.
have 800 gallons of base.
Yep. So we let the whole fermentation process takes 4 to 5 days. We let it go all the way through 7. At that point, we kill off the yeast because we're at a super dry product. The yeast strand that we use will get up to 13-14%. We want it to stay right under 7 in order for us to not have to get into a different tax bracket. Whereas we're paying like 70 cents a gallon, we jump up to like $3.90 a gallon.
What?
Yeah,
That's nuts.
Yeah.
I'm going to bookmark this, but
Yeah.
I want to talk about bubble tax
Yeah.
later.
Oh, yeah.
we'll save that for later.
Yeah. No doubt. And also, we find that, if you start getting significantly higher than 7%, your aging time goes up a good amount more. You also, once again, can't drink as much of it. And we love drinking these meads, and we don't want to have to struggle too hard the next day. But if you start getting too much lower than 7, it's also can start to come off as wider. I mean, alcohol it's doing more than getting you feeling good, right? It gives things body, and it really adds to a flavor profile and a complexity of things. And so the less that you go below that 7%, it wasn't as enjoyable or interesting to us. So the tax bracket is something significant on the economic and business side of things, but there also is an aspect of, for us, that's what made the best mead too.
Yeah, absolutely. We played with between 6 and 8 for a long time, and that's kind of the sweet spot that we found. So after that week of fermentation, we kill off all the active yeast in there. Then we back sweeten. So we'll bring it up to that 001 to 004 range. We let it sit in that back sweetening tank for usually 2 to 3 more weeks, just to let it age, and then it gets split off. It ages again for another 1 to 2 weeks in the tank, and each time we're racking. So we're racking just from the top. We don't use any type of forced filtration, so it's just everything falling out of solution, racking from the top, bringing it to the next tank. Usually you're losing, depending on the tank size, like 10 to 20 gallons per racking. After that next aging step, so it's fermentation, back sweeten, aging, then it gets split off, and that's where we do all of our infusions and flavoring. So most infusions that we do are freeze-dried fruit. So we'll take freeze-dried fruit. Sorry, I feel like I slurred that all together there. So we'll take big, giant tea bags. We'll take a bunch of freeze-dried blueberries, say, throw them in a food processor, blend them all together, add it into the tea bag, drop it into the solution, and then it sits anywhere, depending on what we're using, between like 8 hours and 2 weeks. So
wow.
yeah, there's a big fluctuation. Like we'll do some teas that are like you have to taste them every half hour, or else they're gonna get way too
That's a
bitter.
tough job,
kidding.
man. I don't know how you
Yeah,
do it.
no,
I would
it's
hate to do that job, man.
It
Yeah, what a shame,
It
right?
sounds
Terrible.
more
Just
fun
to
than it
stand
is
there and
after a
drink.
while.
Man, bummer.
Like if that was the only thing I had to do in a day, I would love it. When I'm trying to do that and a couple other things, I'm like, wow, yeah. Like someone else taste this.
Yeah, drunk emails are
Yeah.
can be a real challenge.
Or phone calls. I'm like, what are we? Yeah. So after that point, we pull everything. It'll get transferred into a bright tank. So bright tank is pretty typical brewing equipment. It's a big reinforced stainless steel tank that has a glycol jacket around the outside. So glycol is just a type of antifreeze. You're able to cool the liquid down to about 32 degrees.
Oh, wow.
That you force carbonate. So it's called a carb stone. So it's a long cylinder that's broken up into all these tiny holes. You pump all the liquid over it as CO2 is pumping in, and that force carbonates any beverage. So sparkling water to beer, this is all how they carbonate. It sits in the bright tank for overnight just to kind of let stuff fall out. And then we pump it into kegs, into bottles, or into cans at that point.
Right on.
Yeah.
So what's your timing for that carb stone, you're carbonating in that keg? Is that 24 hours? Is that, because for us, like home brewers, that's
Couple
2
days
to
sometimes.
3 days
Yeah,
at
usually
30
you're pumping it
PSI.
on the top, right? So there's a cool little thing that we have. Gosh, I cannot remember the name of it.
Zom or
No, it's a quick carb pump. So what you can do is you chill it down. Ideally, you leave it in your fridge, but then it's a pump that has a little carb stone in it, and you can do this straight in a corny keg, and it'll carb your mead 45 minutes. It'll carb an entire tank. Yeah.
Homebrewers
next level.
yeah. Homebrewers
Yeah.
everywhere. Like,
what?
Hacks, tips, and tricks.
Yeah.
you mean I don't have to shake my car?
Yeah, you're shaking it every. Yeah, or upside
Under the
down
desk.
and upside. Yeah,
I've done that too many times.
Yeah, we did that a lot, especially in the opening days when we're like, we need more meads, like get them in the
Yeah.
back. But yeah,
It's
so
interesting. There are some things that got easier at the commercial level because there's equipment that's made to process these things easier than I remember us doing at the homebrew level. At the homebrew level, yeah, it was just clear out the fridge, get a 5-gallon bucket of mead going, get it in the fridge overnight, and then start potentially carbonate it for days.
the
But
counter pressure filler for every bottle. That you
It's been 10 years doing
that was
that.
a devil. That was a devil for me.
what Jake was just describing, I think that thing's just like $80 online, and because Jake's describing the process of making 800 gallons or and then we branch it off into these infusions, so 100 or 200 gallon size batches. We still do some 5-gallon stuff here and there, especially in the R&D period, and those that quick carber. That gets used all the time back in the production as well.
Yeah, and we have a whole non-alcoholic line that we're running too, and that's all on a much smaller scale. So we use that thing almost daily, and it's nice. You just crank out kegs, 45 minutes at a time.
So I want to ask about your fruit. You mentioned using freeze-dried fruit, which is something I've never done. It's very
New to
interesting.
me.
Yeah.
So did you guys start with regular fruit, frozen or fresh, and then you were like, I'm tired of this game, and then you found the freeze-dried, or like what? How'd you stumble across that? Because I feel like that's very new.
It's
for
not that
us.
we got tired of it. The game, some wonderful old timey mead makers that have won a lot of national competitions had talked to
Had a
us
couple of those.
about our process, and one of them acknowledged that the most important thing to Jake and I is not the romance of the process, but is the end result. And it can be hard sometimes not to get caught up in the desire to do something one way because it sounds more romantic. And so, for instance, one of my greatest examples of that is the fresh fruit versus freeze-dried fruit. We played with fresh fruit a bunch, and it felt just more natural and more romantic, more earthy to do it that way. And yet all that water that was coming in the fresh fruit was diluting our meads down. And as we were just talking about earlier with the importance of AB level to give things body and richness, what we were finding is that was taking what was already a low ABV mead, that was just had for us the right amount of body, and it was turning it into a juice. And so the next best thing to fresh fruit when it comes to vitamin, mineral content, flavor preservation, pigment preservation is freeze-dried fruit. And so we started playing around with that, and we were really able to hold on to all those qualities. It felt like just as much, if not even more so, with some fruits than if they were fresh.
Do you find you use more or less in freeze-dried? Are you?
That was my question. Pounds per gallon.
Like,
what are we talking about?
I mean, if you were to translate it to fresh fruit, it'd probably be more. But
Okay.
Yeah. Because
as in if you rehydrated the freeze-dried
if
fruit
it,
to bring
the
it back
original
to a
free fruit, if you didn't dehydrate or freeze dry it down, then it would be probably more that we're using at the freeze dried level. But yeah,
And you're able to pretty easily commercially find large amounts of freeze-dried fruit.
except for the great freeze-dried blackberry scare of 2020. It really, because one of our most popular meads is a rosemary blackberry mead that we do. And for some reason, the rise of COVID, it was toilet paper and freeze-dried blackberries. That
no,
people
it was
seemed to want.
it was the
I was hoarding
the,
them.
the
What
Yeah,
did
and
you say?
I stocked up. I have a whole closet still. It's just
the
all
big
freeze-dried
heat wave
blackberries.
yeah, I knew it was you.
Yeah.
No,
Someday.
there was a big heat wave in the Northwest. This is what one of the
Oh, that's right.
yeah, and so it killed off all the blackberries like through Oregon and Washington. So like every like Nutri-Grain bar and all the massive companies bought up everything else they could find, and we're like, what do we do here? Yeah, so that's up. That was
And-
like
and to
9 months of
clarify-
not having it.
The fruit's going in after stabilization. So you're preserving the sugars and the flavors and everything.
And after back sweetening, which is I mentioned that because you guys do something a little bit different than most traditional homebrewers. Most people listening here are homebrewers, and so they're doing stuff. I feel like a primary fermentation, probably throwing in some fruit in for a secondary fermentation, stabilizing and back sweetening. So the idea of stabilizing, back sweetening, and then adding flavors is just a new thing, but it's really interesting. Like it makes me really want to play with freeze-dried fruit. I've never tried it. In fact, Adam, our good friend who's been hosting us.
Shout out to Adam.
Shout out to Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Adam.
Speaking of fun,
Adam was our
mead
tour
makers.
guide and chauffeur
Yeah.
this weekend, and he's been nothing but charming, and his wife Cindy is amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful house. We got to pet the goats.
And Charlie.
And Charlie. I let Charlie in and out of the house, I don't know, a dozen times.
So Adam he's been doing not freeze-dried fruit, but just dried fruit. And so that's something that I've always thought about, but never done. So it's just super interesting.
And our friend Jake, he's very active in our community, was trying to do a dragon fruit mead. And he bought all this freeze-dried dragon fruit powder, and he said nothing transferred to the mead, right? And so like after it was 2-3 years ago, I was like, freeze-dried fruit must be, it's not the right route to go, right? But you guys you found a way.
And there are some that are super hard. Pear, we've never been able to find a freeze-dried pear that you get any flavoring from,
I like
unless
pear's
you're
hard
doing
in
like
general, though. Pear is one of those that, like, even
It's
if you
delicate.
do it, you like
Yeah.
throw 1,000,000 pounds in, you're like, I don't get enough of it. So
yeah.
Yeah, it's for us the freeze-dried fruit thing. It just has all these benefits to it, right? So it keeps the body of the mead at a level that we really enjoy. It can still impart almost as much flavor. I mean, you could of course add as much freeze-dried fruit as you want to it and really amp up that flavor to whatever degree, along with the pigmentation. And that pigmentation is probably something that you lose a bit on. I mean, our freeze-dried blueberries aren't going to give you the same degree of pigment that if you put in a bunch of fresh blueberries into it. But it also is a lot more shelf stable than fresh fruit as well. And so once again, at the scale that we operate as a meadery, it just is it's easier, right? So we get the wonderful body, the great flavors, and then we get the ease of storage and use in this scale of production. So it works really well for us. That's by no means the only ingredients that we use in our meads beyond, of course, honey, water, yeast, and nutrients. We still do play with some fresh things. For instance, in our pineapple jalapeno mead, it's all fresh jalapenos that go in there. Or
That mead was fire.
It was very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
And like
yeah.
not hot fire, like just it was so good.
Yeah, there's really no spice to it. It's just the flavors of the jalapenos in there. Our dry hop mead, of course, is using dried hops, not freeze-dried hops, right? Just regular dried hops. Our blueberry lemon uses freeze-dried blueberries, but it's the brewer's most hated day in the brewery because he's just squeezing lemons all all day long.
I saw all those gallons of lemon juice back there.
That's actually for the bar. The lemons are fresh squeezed for every ounce of lemon juice that goes into that BL Bliss.
amazing.
And so, for instance, for our cocktails, we've done side-by-sides with bottled lemon versus fresh lemon. And we actually, in a blind taste test, can prefer the bottled lemon. But we did that same thing, much to the excitement of our brewer, that we were going to switch over to bottled lemon. And unfortunately, blind taste tests revealed that the fresh lemon juice with that blueberry lemon mead just tasted so much better. It tasted softer. There wasn't as much, of that acidic bite that you might associate with lemon. So yeah, once again, it goes back to that old notion of, we don't get too into these days as commercial brewers, especially, we don't get too into the romance of it. What we're concerned about is just making a damn delicious mead at the end of it, and we'll do whatever it takes to get it there.
So you were saying 10 to 20 gallons of sediment every time you rack, right? And then the freeze-dried fruit obviously adds to some
of the sediment.
Some sediment too. So two questions. Are you guys doing any filtering back there? And what do you do with all that sediment? So you got a big compost heap we don't know about here?
No. So we don't do any filtration, just all racking, just straight from the top racking, and let everything fall out naturally. And then as far as sediment, we wash it down the drain.
Right down the drain.
Yeah. It's a lot gnarlier looking than what you want it to be. Because I'm like, we should do something, and then like I poured some in a tank one time, and then like let it sit for 2 weeks, and it's still like murky.
Yeah.
So it's washing, it's putting it with water in case the environmental department's watching. We water it down to a safe level.
Record it on the sheet.
Yeah, it's on our sheet. We record it.
Yeah,
and then get our pH at the right level, and then wash it down the drain. Yeah.
I mean, so that leads to the next question. I mentioned bubble tax earlier. Are you guys subject to the bubble tax, like the cider industry? And can you just generally talk to us about regulatory hurdles that you've had?
All it will touch on the
There's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, the bubble tax is a tax that our federal government has for carbonated wines. And if your carbonation level is over a certain threshold, your tax per gallon goes from pennies to dollars. And it's been tricky as an industry in learning how to navigate that. I can't quite speak to how Black Rabbit has navigated that, but I can speak to how the American Mead Makers Association told us.
It's okay to leave some things ambiguous.
Meaderies
Just a big long bleep just for the next 3
potentially are
minutes.
that carbonation threshold, how to navigate it, and what we had heard the association was told, was told by the one lawyer I've heard that the association has, was that a letter was written across those unfortunate meaderies that are carbonating above that threshold to just not pay it. And in conjunction with that was correspondence with the TTB about that tax and it potentially getting rewritten to not be as prejudiced as it is against those in the industry. Now, I'm sure Black Rabbit pays that tax, and therefore
We're below the threshold.
Yeah, definitely.
Below the threshold.
Fortunately, I don't deal with the financials. But
So-
yeah, it's. I mean, this also once again speaks to the ancientness of mead, and yet the newness of the industry. I mean, that bubble tax was put in place for champagne. I mean, it's not just known as the bubble tax; it's often known as the champagne tax.
Yeah.
And there's different conspiracy theories on why that was put in place. Was it does this stem back into our adorable nostalgic resentment towards the French as pre 1900 Americans? Does it go back into the California wine industry? I don't know, but what it definitely impacts today is the healthy growth of an aspect of the meat industry, which is proving to be quite popular, and yet has this glass ceiling being put over it. And as mead makers, then if you're following the law to the T, you have to be very mindful of what you're doing, and potentially have to really invest yourself into something that feels, frankly, silly and prejudice, particularly because bring it back to like the hard apple cider side of things. Apple ciders don't have to pay it because if you're fermented from apple, you are one of the most nostalgic, beloved drinks of America.
America's favorite beverage.
It's the opposite of a bubble tax.
Yeah.
I mean, apple. If you're fermented from apple and you're carbonated, you're paying one of the lowest taxes per gallons on the federal level. And which is wonderful. I'm not. I'm proud of my hard apple cider making brothers and sisters out there that are trying to get by. And I think they would be the first to acknowledge that shouldn't be a tax that's a tax benefit that's kept only for them.
Yeah, there's a big push from the American Cider Association to eliminate the bubble tax, and they've been lobbying and promoting representatives and senators who are in support of eliminating it. And so I think that's probably something that's coming up next year.
That's awesome.
And I think it's good progress, because paying higher taxes because it's carbonated seems like an archaic system.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, for those folks out there that are interested in owning a meadery, I will say that you're about to embark on a fascinating, mysterious, frustrating adventure through your state and the federal government's regulations around it. It is by no means something that has become universalized and codified across a state, or much less the United States. The alcohol laws are wild, and they're things that I think every commercial producer are still getting familiar with. If you've only been in the game for a few years and are learning something, you're always learning something new, and then the laws can change. And as we were talking about in Nevada, we had some really interesting and oppressive laws for the wine scene. And we've worked hard as with a limited number of wineries that we have it out here, and on pushing forth legislation to make things better. So if folks don't like the way that their laws are in their particular state, I mean, it's from our personal experience, these are things that can be changed and probably should be changed.
Regulations are great for safety.
Yeah.
But working toward deregulation for creative industries like this, I think, enhances the end product for the consumer.
Yeah.
And so it's a balance, but I think there's promise there on the horizon for modernizing liquor laws across the nation, and it seems like there's a big push toward it right now.
Yeah, and I feel for any of those lawmakers out there, we're in this explosive time of creative growth in the alcohol industry over the last 30 years. As we were talking about at dinner before the podcast, just with you guys acknowledging that distilling at the home levels potentially going to become legalized across the U.S. And it was just something wild to think about 50 years ago. I mean, the fact that it wasn't, as of today, is still not. But it's not something that people were necessarily even interested in on a mass scale 50 years ago. And yet what we've seen certainly across our community, and I'm sure across the states, if not the world, is the alcohol world has diversified tremendously, and we're seeing this wonderful enthusiasm for people making it at home. And I feel for any lawmaker that has to then figure out what to do about that, how to classify these things, how to regulate these things, because like it or not, we are dealing in a controlled substance here. It is it's poison may sound a little strong, but certainly an intoxicant, and it does deserve that careful regulatory attention on some level. But as you were acknowledging, it's one thing to protect the health and safety of a community. It's a whole nother thing to limit not only the creative growth, but the ability for folks just like you and I, that don't necessarily come from a lot of means, from being able to get into this industry and being able to, get a foothold and grow, because also right now it's an insanely expensive industry to get buy-in, and it's hard for any just Joe Schmo to get through. And so creating laws that are really mindful of that experience too.
They say the best way to have $1 million as a brewer is to start out with $2 million. Yeah, it's an expensive industry to get into.
So I had a question about, there are a lot of people who listen who have aspirations of making a meadery. What are some things that you've found difficult going from smaller to larger? Going from, y'all doing 5-gallon batches to like 800-gallon batches. Is there anything that you did not expect or you were warned about and you're like, oh, that was a real thing? Because I'm sure a lot of people have these like, you just multiply it, and next thing you know, it's there, it's done.
No, it's funny how many new brewers get into 6 or 7 batches and then they start asking questions about going commercial. It's like, whoa, pump the brakes here.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely
awkward silence.
We've spent, it's just interesting, trying to remember the days as home brewers, because even though it was less than a decade ago, I mean, it still feels like a lifetime that included a pandemic in the midst of it. But there were a variety of ways that they were just different at the commercial scale. Some things harder, some things easier, but then overall just different. So for instance, like with racking.
Yeah. So before we used to let the original ferment go 2 weeks. We found that extra week of sitting up, and now we're down to a week. That extra week of sitting on the dead lees and yeast started to just give like a super barnyard funk that we'd have to just, it was tons and tons of aeration.
Did you notice that with like specifically one yeast, or did you feel like it was everything you did?
Well, at that point because we just use Lalvin D47 for everything we do now.
And I think it was at the warmer temperatures. So anytime you couldn't do it at that super cool fall through winter temperature, like if it heats up at all, then you start getting that funk off of it, like almost at day 8. It was like started, and then it took a lot longer to age out. So we cut it down to that week. All fermentation had stopped. It was just kind of an aging thing of what we liked at the time.
And this was going. So I think initially we noticed this going from 5 gallons to a couple 100 gallons, right? No, I think at the 5-gallon mark, weren't we going 3 weeks as a ferment before we needed a rack?
2.
Or was it 2 weeks?
2, and we cut it down to 1.
Yeah, when we got up to like the 400-gallon, because it was sitting on so much dead, rotting yeast that you would get these really undesirable sulfur compounds that would gas out, and then just as they were gassing out, it would just infuse with all the mead. And so, but what we learned is just by, as Jake was saying, racking it 1 week earlier, you were able to fully get through your ferment, and then just pull it off those dead yeasts without getting those sulfur compounds in it.
So do you think it was the mass of yeast, or do you think it's the pressure of liquid pushing down on the yeast that's creating that condition?
I've never thought about the pressure side of things. I thought it would just be the sheer number of dead yeast bodies in there.
And just nowhere to go. Like having to go up through that much liquid where you're like 7 feet infusing up into it. It's kind of
A lot of people talk about the osmotic pressure and then yeast, especially at the bottom, and the surly aging and stuff like that. I know that's a big thing with wine, and so that's an interesting.
But they usually describe it as kind of a nutty, kind of bready, nutty, crusty kind of flavor, not sulfur.
Oh yeah, no, this is barnyard.
Oh, it's
So was this like a farmhouse barnyard, or was it like matchsticks, or the dreaded rhino farts that we
Farty does sound. I would say like it was
Party,
like cow
barnyard.
farts. Yeah. So
Okay.
barnyard farts, if you will.
Amarillo, Texas is what we're talking about.
Amarillo, Texas. That's
Countdown.
But it was interesting, even with I remember that batch in particular, and it was one of our first batches into the triple digits, and you can imagine just our horror. And because we spent all this money, we spent all this time, we were so excited, and it was now all, it felt like it was ruined. But even though oxidation seems to be an issue that a lot of mead makers have frustrations with, we think because of we hit it with sulfites and sorbates to arrest those yeast, that it makes it pretty tolerant of oxidation, and therefore with that, I think with that batch, what we did is we just pumped it into a barrel, like continuously cycled and pumped it into a barrel, and it was able to finally gas all out, and we were able to save that product.
At the home scale, we call that splash racking.
That's pretty much what it was. It was like on the side of a big tank as it just ran down the
We
side
just
for
fire hosed it.
like 2 hours until it was.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was terrifying. Those 2 hours though.
Yeah, we were when we did our little tour back there. I was noticing some of your fermenters have quite a bit of headspace on them. Are you doing anything to fill that? Are you just relying on the natural CO2?
Most of the headspace is used after it's arrested, so all the yeast is arrested, and then we haven't really dealt with much oxidation, which is what Will was saying. But then, any of the initial ones, there's not a ton of headspace, and then, CO2 filling it up. And then as soon as it stabilizes, we haven't really run into any oxidation problems yet.
Right on.
So, I guess a question for a young meadery, because y'all are arguably young in
Hey,
the
happy
industry.
5 years.
Yeah,
Oh,
5
thank
years,
you.
right?
It's August 10th. Is that
July, August, June, somewhere in there.
Yeah, this is a great
Scheduling's always a
example
pain.
of our
the fluidity
both
of your
our youthfulness as a meadery, right? So 5 years in, but also of just the explosive growth over the last 5 years. August actually has no relevancy to when we opened, except that it was in the season of summer. Our soft opening was in June. Our grand opening was in July. But we're so gosh dang busy as a meadery, and which of course is much more than just making mead. With at least with our business model, we have a 1,000 square foot bar that of course serves our mead, but then has a spirits program and a beer program as well, and savory hand pies and live music and drag queen bingo and a bunch of different fun things. And so it's hard to find the time to plan a anniversary party. I don't think we've been able to comfortably plan an anniversary party since day one. And it always
10
feels
years,
like
10
we're
years, right? That'll be it.
there we go. It would be nice to feel like we're doing this months out, but here we are in the last few weeks, just trying to throw something fun together.
pizza party.
Yeah.
Little Caesars.
So I guess my question is, for anyone who's interested, who's listening and going, I want to do this. I want to start this meadery. I've been, sitting on it for years, because I feel like every home brewer starts, they get 10 batches in, as BC said, and they go, this is it. I'm gonna go commercial. I'm ready. Give me like a couple things that are like, hey, hold on, pump the brakes. Here's something that was a little bit scary, but then also give me some. Is there any I don't want to say success story. Is there anything that maybe was not as scary of a hurdle as what you maybe heard? I know it's a hard one there. Obviously, the fears are the easy thing, because most people get scared off.
Yeah, I mean, I would just do your research on state laws regarding distribution of alcohol. That's a tricky one in Nevada, and I know there's a lot of states out there where it's a 3-tiered system. So you're not just going down to the grocery store and convincing the buyer to sell it. You need to find someone who's going to take your product and then turn around and sell your product to the grocery store, to the bar, to everybody out there. So distribution laws within the state are a tricky one. We've been really lucky with the distributor that we have. They're a big craft representative in the community, and they picked us up pretty quickly and started serving us throughout Northern Nevada. But yeah, that's the first one I would look at, because you're not making it for this price and selling it to the consumer for this price. You're making it for this. The distributor's taking this. Then the consumer's taking it for this.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
Yeah, that's how Oklahoma is structured.
Pretty
Yeah.
You
brutal.
basically have to have a distributor.
yeah. Yep. And there's some laws that they're trying to change, like up to a certain case price or case amount, you can self-distribute. Hasn't happened yet. California's not like that. So in California, you could be making it across the street, sell it to the grocery store right
Oh.
there. But distributors also have they're nice. Like, we don't
Yeah.
have to make sales visits nearly as much as if we had to sell it ourselves.
And you can lean on their relationships to get it places where you don't have to forge that on your own.
Exactly. And like those a lot of those bars trust their craft products, so they'll bring on them with a level of trust that maybe they wouldn't have with you if you're just showing up at their doorstep and be like, try
Yeah.
our mead, and they're like, what is mead? So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges just getting into the small business world altogether, especially one that requires a brick and mortar, a building, especially one that requires a lot of equipment, requires, there's a lot of fees that goes along with getting your licenses and your permits, and the economics of it are truly daunting, especially for Jake and I, who are just former high school teachers, and that we didn't have a strong business background. And so there's a lot of people with money out there that are looking to invest into passion projects, and it's important to learn that scene as quickly as you can, and unless you are one of those people with means, but I find that most of us aren't, and Jake and I certainly weren't. We did find that those people are going to take you more seriously. One, if you have a good product. Two, that you're very passionate about that product, and then you're also very serious about making a successful business out of it. And there's potentially no better way to convey that seriousness than in developing your brand identity.
Right.
And it's something that I still find that the mead world could take more seriously, and that's not you doodling on Canva or whatever online site
What?
it
Canva's
is,
like everything, though.
or getting onto the paid version of ChatGPT and just giving some adjectives to make a logo for you. It's you. Saving up some money and investing in a professional graphic designer, pouring your soul out to that person, and having that person develop a strong brand identity for you. And then you take that with your delicious product and all your passion, and I imagine every community, at least of a decent size, will have resources to be able to connect you to investors. And it's a hard game to think of how to get into without those investors, but they are out there, and just stay optimistic about it, and keep working hard, and you'll get there. We all do on some level. So to me, that was the biggest challenges going into it, to where you may make a wonderful mead just after 10 meads, and I celebrate that desire to get into the industry, and there's a lot of us that are here to help you do that, but the hardest thing to help on is that economic backing, and along with that, you can work on a business model. We spend a lot of time doing that. We find that that's similar to a college degree, in the sense that you're not necessarily going to use the information you learned in that particular class, but it's just getting you really well-rounded for the business world, getting you familiar with the different ins and outs of that world. But I find, at least with us, there's a lot of different business models for Meadery. What we've come to really value, though, is diversifying your revenue streams. And so that's not just thinking about the meads that you make and the flavors, but is how else are you bringing in revenue into that company? And COVID became a really interesting testing grounds for that, which, yes, there was tremendous hardship and challenges for many, and some, the most extreme hardships and challenges. But there was an interesting thing that COVID did for young small businesses, if they were able to economically find their way, whether by luck or fortune or strategy, I don't know. But is it slowed time down a bit, and it allowed us to really play with some different ways of bringing money into the company. And so, yes, we're very proud of the cider style meads that we did. We talked about getting into our cocktail style meads, but also it's bottling your honey, getting a great label for that, getting that out there. It's getting some cool merch, T-shirts, hats, horn mugs. It's throwing events at your meadery. It's seeing your company as, this organic being that, lives off community support, which that community support comes in through money. And so one of Jake's and my favorite sayings here at the Meadery that drives so much of what we do is we don't own the Meadery, Reno does. And so everything we do is a communication with a conversation with our community about what they want. And they want more than one type of alcohol to drink. Impressive is the human that only drinks one type of alcohol and seeks just one type of experience. And so I would say anyone that's looking into getting Meadery, there's a ton of ways to do it. You don't even need a bar. Gronfield Meadery up in the Northeast right now is predominantly just doing online sales. And so that's a great business model too. We don't do that one. The one that we've found success with, though, is this one that is, we stay on brand. We have our strong values that drive everything we do. For instance, all the spirits we sell, nearly all are made within 50 miles. Same with our beers. And so those values speak to everything we do, but we do try to diversify what we do as much as we can, in part because we love it and it's all a celebration of our community, but also there's the real deal of the economics of it too, and it just brings in multiple revenue streams to keep you, to keep you growing as a small company, because growing, if you're not swimming forward, you're falling back, and you'll ultimately drown in the small business world out here.
That's one thing that, as we were talking, I really love the community aspect you guys have gone for, because I think it's easy to open a meadery and say, I'm going to sell mead. And you can do that, but y'all do so much I sound so Southern, to integrate the community in with all the events you host and all these other evening things you guys do, and the spirits integration. I think that just draws a whole new crowd of people into mead, and it becomes not just like here's a Viking beverage. It's like, this is like a crew you can be a part of. You can hang out with these people. There's a bunch of stuff to do, and I think that's fascinating. It's next level. It takes you guys to a new level, and you make great mead. That's like, you start there, and then you just keep going up. So y'all are doing awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's how Jake and I got into this years ago. I don't know if we even had tried mead before we started making it. And
first one we tried was our own.
I think so, right? I mean, we had heard of it in, J.R.R. Tolkien's work, Lord of the Rings, or, Beowulf, or what have you. But we ultimately got into it because we shared we were high school teachers. I was a science teacher. I shared the office with the math teacher, who happened to be just one of the largest honey producers in the region. And my background is in microbial ecology, right? Study of how microorganisms interact with their environment. And so he knew that, and he's like, hey, would you ever want to turn my honey into some alcohol? And I said, sure.
Yes,
I
please.
was into arts and crafts and such. And of course I enjoyed alcohol, and but I had never once again made it. But our social studies teacher here, Jake, he had
You tell me teachers drink?
What? Lo and behold.
I had no idea the teachers drank. I thought they were all clean.
I wondered what happened in the teachers' lounge.
I thought they lived at the school. And
just a bunch of car boys in there.
So Jake had made a bunch of beer, and we started making the mead together. And that's kind of, the short of the story that we tell. But one thing that doesn't get included in that rendition is the fact that actually our interest in making mead was, yes, our interest in alcohol, but more so our interest in the fact that we can make alcohol from a good local ingredient. And for God's sakes, we made it horribly for years. And yet somehow we stayed motivated. And so it wasn't the taste, but it was the fact that we were making this from something local. And that's why Jake and I taught, is because we wanted to, work with the kids in our community and talk about cool stuff and help them grow in that way. And then that's how we got into making mead, because it was from our community. And so when we finally were able to create a meadery, we were excited to do so much more than just sell mead, because it was once again another opportunity for us to like celebrate our community. And I don't know, I mean, Jake and I both love our community for similar reasons and different reasons as well, but no doubt community is what drives all of it. And Reno has grown so much in the last several decades, and it's just been so wonderful to be a part of that growth.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city.
It is super cool.
We've had a lot of fun here. Like the public art, the green spaces, even though you're in a desert. Like
we went up in the hills in the middle of nowhere in a house. It was beautiful. We saw all the scenery. It was awesome. Yeah.
It's gorgeous here. So I feel like we're probably close to the end of things, but I wanted to ask you, because you have several flagships, and a lot of people have consistency or problems finding consistency and repeating their recipes over and over and over again. And I imagine that scaling up to 800 gallons and then doing 1 to 200 gallon batches, there are a lot of variables. Did you guys have any struggles with making sure that all of your flagships are consistent batch to batch to batch? Or do you find that it's a pretty level playing field out there?
Well, once we dialed in the Church of Roger, so like our base recipe, when we dialed that in on like a larger scale, that became much easier. You do still run into consistencies like the jalapenos. One summer we came across like jalapenos had no spice in them. Like we went throughout Reno trying jalapenos, nowhere had spice. So we had to pretty much. Don't tell anyone. We use Serrano peppers to
I'm telling everybody right now.
Dun, dun,
to end up bringing the spice a little
This
bit.
was years ago.
Yeah,
It was years ago. Jalapenos
it doesn't
not
happen.
spicy again.
I'm calling the TTB tonight.
But yeah, so there are still those issues that you'll run into, and like taste early, taste often. That's kind of how we go about doing it and making sure that our product is as consistent as we possibly can. We also have a really good team in place to help kind of balance everything out. Everyone tastes everything. Everyone knows what it should taste like. Okay. As soon as there is a problem, they relay it to us immediately. So, and that goes from like bartenders up at front of house to brewers in back of house. Like if there's any issues that come up, we pretty much know about them immediately to help kind of mitigate any further issues.
I gotta say, the staff here has been incredible.
Absolutely.
Super welcoming. Like we strolled in at like 4 o'clock and got a really impromptu tour. The space is beautiful. The calendar on the wall is full of amazing community events. And so I'm a little envious that we don't have something like this in Oklahoma City.
For sure. So my last little thing here is, obviously, if anyone doesn't know where we're at, we're in Reno, Nevada. And this is Black Rabbit Meadery, if you haven't picked that up after hearing all this. How can people support you if they can't make it to Reno? Is there any way people can people buy online? Can people, I don't know, is there merch? Like what can people do to support you guys if they can't make it here themselves?
You should come here, though.
You should definitely, this is assuming that you live in like, I don't know, Korea or somewhere and you can't make it over here.
Yeah, first and foremost, come here. You can visit Lake Tahoe. It's beautiful. Reno is a blossoming, amazing community. We love it. Next, I think we ship to 39 states. Right now, we're just doing our flagships. So 22-ounce bottles of our flagships. If you get 6 bottles, it's free shipping. So that's a cool little bonus. We're hopefully going to be adding some more or subbing in some of the new meads in the near future. And then one day, we're going to start selling merch online. Just not today. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say with that, what a rising tide floats all ships, and keep making mead yourself, keep making it better and better, so your friends and family will be impressed by it and tell their friends and family, and keep supporting your local craft alcohol manufacturers, but particularly the meaderies, And it's Mead over the last couple decades has grown tremendously, but we still have so much more to go, especially with these carbonated session meads. We're in a light and refreshing drink revolution right now across the U.S. This is a wonderful time for the carbonated session side of the mead world to grow by leaps and bounds. So, keep making it, keep drinking it, keep supporting those that are doing those things. And if as heartfelt as it sounds, if your desire is to support Black Rabbit, that ultimately will support us in the end. But of course, we know that desire is out there to support a lot of different folks, and especially, more importantly, the folks in your community.
Yeah, your local mead makers. Support them as much as possible, for sure.
And your apiaries.
And your apiaries.
Yeah,
buy
for
local
sure.
honey.
Yeah. I mean, that's at the heart of what we do, and those
Y'all have
beekeepers
an in-house, which is crazy. Y'all have an in-house beekeeper. Like, he just drops off the honey in the building, which is super cool.
Oh, it's delicious honey.
It
He let us sample it, and he said it's the honey the beekeeper has trouble selling. And so it's like a win-win for everybody.
I guess we'll use it. I guess.
Fine.
Yeah, no, Al does quite well. He has a company called Al Bees. He sold, throughout the greater municipality. He's been running his business a lot longer than we have. In some senses, he has a meadery in his bee bottling plant here. But it is a wonderful relationship that we had. I mean, he's been involved with us ever since the beginning, and so here we are, a decade plus in with him. And so, yeah, make friends with a beekeeper as well. That's another way that you not only can support the meat industry, but certainly support your own ambitions in it.
And you guys have a very active social media presence. Where can folks find you online?
We do, yeah. So Black Rabbit Meads or Black Rabbit Mead Company, depending upon the social media channels. Of course, we have a website online, blackrabbitmeads.com. That would take you right to all those things. And yeah, it's this business is operating on all fronts. And we've learned so much over the many years on what those fronts are like, and we're still growing in so many ways, and everyone learning so much more about them.
We appreciate you guys hosting us, and the tasting flights earlier were a lot of fun.
You should definitely, if you can make it here, get here and try some stuff. It's fantastic. So thank you guys for not only just being willing to host us and hang out, but share your knowledge and your experience, because I know people who are listening, everyone has aspirations, and I think continues to inspire us. I feel inspired. BC and I are inspired to go further now with our own aspirations in the future. So thank you guys for supporting Mead and the community, but also just inspiring the next generation of people.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys.
Thanks for being here tonight.
And thank you guys for all that you're doing right now to keep this this mead scene growing as well, and sharing all that you guys have been sharing, and helping us therefore all understand the mead world even better. Really
Blast.
appreciate it.
Can't complain. It's easiest job.
The last 2 days have been a mead-fueled blur, and I'm here for it.
Yeah,
But-
which speaking of, let's
Yeah.
get back into drinking, wrap
Yeah,
things up.
we're about
Try
to-
some more mead.
The night is young.
So if you want to support Black Rabbit and you're listening or watching or whatever you're doing, hop down in the description. There's some links. Check them out. Support them. Check out Reno, Nevada, if you haven't been here. First time we can say, BC, we've been to Reno.
We've
Next
done
time we
Reno.
come here, we've been to Reno. So when people ask us, we can say, yep, we've been
We have
here.
to come back and do Tahoe,
We
I
do.
guess,
Yeah.
but
But thank you guys, and let's go drink some more mead.
Heck yeah.
Woo!
Perfect.
Cheers.
Cheers, y'all.
Cheers. Stop.